Welcome to MAT 2LB, booklet number 3, decimals, percent, and tax, lesson number 5, percents of numbers. Sometimes when we're working with percentages, we are interested in finding out what the percent is of a number that's not 100. So let's take example number 1. 30% means that we have 30 out of 100 pieces shaded in or represented, but what if we don't have 100 pieces? What if we have a different amount? What if we have 50, or what if we have 120, like we do in example 1? How do we go about finding what 30%, 30 parts out of not 100, but a 30% representation of 120 pieces? That's what we're going to tackle in this lesson today. So let's go to step number 1. Convert the percent into a decimal by dividing by 100. So this is a familiar step. We're going to take whatever our percentage number is, which is 30, divide it by 100, and that's going to give us 0.3. Step number 2, multiply your decimal by whatever the number is. So in this case, we take our decimal, which is 0.3, and multiply it by the number we want to know 30% of, which is going to be 120. This is the value that we type into our calculator. We type in 0.3 times 120. The answer it gives us is 36. So 36 is 30% of 120. So those are the steps involved in finding out a percentage of a number that's not 100. Let's have a look at example A. Here we're going to find 40% of 250. So we start, if we look to the steps, step number 1 is to convert our percent number into a decimal. We do that by taking our percent number, which is 40, dividing it by 100, and that's going to give us 0.4. Once we have our decimal, we take it, this is step number 2, so 0.4, and we multiply it by whatever the number is we want to know 40% of. In this question, it's going to be 250. That's the value that we type into our calculator. So 0.4 times 250 gives us 100. So 100 is 40% of 250. Let's try one more example together, just to make sure we've got those steps down. B here, we want to find 65% of 20. So the first thing we want to do is convert our percent number into a decimal by taking our percent number, which is 65, and dividing it by 100. We type that into our calculator and we get 0.65. Step number 2 is to take that decimal, 0.65, and multiply it by whatever the number is we want to know 65% of, in this case, 20. We type this into our calculator, 0.65 times 20, and it gives us 13. So 13 is 65% of 20. So we have examples C, D, E, and F here. Let's see if you can get these steps down. Again, if you have to reference them from the notes, that's no problem. Let's start with C. See if you can figure out what 10% of 125 is. And hit pause here. When you got it, come on back. We'll see how you did. Okay, let's have a look at this one. 10% of 125 starts by converting our 10% into a decimal by dividing it by 100. That will give us 0.1. Step number 2 is to take our decimal and multiply it by 125, the number we want to know 10% of. And when we type that into our calculator, 0.1 times 125, it gives us 12.5. So our answer has a decimal in it. Is that a problem? Not at all. Absolutely fine. We're going to leave it, unless the question says to round it away from that, we're going to leave any decimal that shows up in the display of our calculator. So this is looking great. Let's have you guys try, so let's hit pause here. Let's have you guys try example D on your own. When you think you've got it, come on back. We'll see how you did. Okay, you're back. Let's see how we did. 5% expressed as a decimal is 5 divided by 100, which gives us 0.05. Hopefully you all remembered to put in that 0 after the decimal place, that you didn't just leave it out by accident. Hopefully you caught that one. Step number 2 is to take that decimal, 0.05, multiply it by the number that we want to know 5% of. In this case it's 40, and we type that into our calculator. 0.05 times 40 gives us 2. So 2 is 5% of 40. On to example E. Let's let you guys try example E. When you've got an answer, come on back, unpause it, and we'll see how you did. All right, let's take a look. 8% expressed as a decimal is 8 divided by 100, which when we type it into our calculator gives us 0.08. From there, we take our decimal, 0.08, and multiply it by 90, the number we want to know 8% of. Type that into our calculator, and that gives us 7.2. Again, a decimal answer, that's not a problem. Nothing wrong with that. Let's have a look at the last example in this lesson, example F. It's a little bit odd. The answer will seem a little bit strange, but I'd like you to give it a try anyway. So hit pause here and come on back when you've got an answer. We'll see how you did. Okay, let's have a look at this one. 113%. Now this is odd a little bit because we are experiencing a percentage here larger than 100. It's not the most common thing, but there's nothing wrong with it. So let's follow the same procedure. 113% divided by 100 will give us the decimal, which is 1.13. It's larger than 1. That's not a problem. Let's keep going. Step number 2 is to take our decimal, 1.13, and multiply it by the number we want to know 113% of, which is 50. We're going to type this into our calculator, 1.13 times 50, and that will give us 56.5. So that number, 56.5, is actually larger than the number that we started with, 50. But if we consider that 113% is actually bigger than 100%, it makes sense that our answer will be larger than the number that we started with, which is 50. So there's nothing wrong with ending up with an answer that was larger than when you started with, assuming that you've got a percentage that is larger than 100. So that's a little curveball right there at the end of the lesson. This is the end of lesson number 5. Hopefully you've got this procedure down and you're ready to attack the worksheet, and I'll see you in lesson number 6.